Alright, let's begin. First assignment was to create a graphic object with textures. Not too hard here. We now add a texture to a graphic object, and when it's time to render it, we will set the texture and resource sampler. And DXApp, this is what it looks like. The draw scene is now substantially cleaner now that we're not doing any shader work inside it. And this is what the scene looks like. Next up is the color light. Same thing as with textures, but now we're working with a material instead of a texture. So when it's time to render, we will send the world a material instead. Kind of showcase the value of graphic objects and how clean everything is in DXApp now. Like, I don't even see it sometimes because of how small it is. Two of these objects use color light. We got the sphere and terrain, while the crate and the skybox are using texture still. So even with two different graphic objects, the code is still relatively concise. Next up is to do texture and light. And for this one, I used multiple lights to showcase how they still work with graphic objects. This is just a combination of what we did with the other two. So now we set the resource sampler and the world material. So that means we're working with both a material and a texture. So when we run it, except we got the pyramid and the terrain using the texture and the light, whereas this crate over here has a spotlight flies through it, and the skybox are just using textures, no lighting whatsoever. Final thing to do was to iterate through everything again and do them with meshes. This one I used files for. So for this now, we now have an array of materials, an array of textures for the triplet. And now that we're creating new things, we have to delete them when we're done with the object. And so now we either iterate through each point in the array and make them the same, or we can call out a specific mesh number and make that a specific material or texture. And when it's time to render, we will now loop through the meshes, set the resource sampler and material to that current mesh's texture and material, and then render that mesh. Color light, same thing, but no texture. Make sure we delete the new material array. And texture is same, but we have a texture instead of material. So if I run it, we have the space frigate using the texture, no, not the texture, excuse me, using the color light. We have this table using color. We have these potions found by Christian using the spotlights. As you can see them kind of moving around. They got the texture and the light. And then we have this well that I found using only texture. This third potion over here, I know it looks weird. The reason why I chose to make it look weird like that is to showcase how you can have different textures in the array and it will still render. So for that one, I used, I want to say it was the potions roughness specifically, whereas the other two just used the base potions model. So that shows that two of them can be rendered with one texture while the third one can be rendered with a different one, and it won't cause any errors. The last thing to talk about was a graphic object with multiple shaders. The way I would go about this is I would try and get the number of meshes from the object before creating a graphic object for the model. And once I know how many meshes there are, I would say I want X as many to be color light and X as many to be texture. So when I create the graphic object, it will have an array of those appropriate sizes. And when it's time to render, we will set the context color for first, go through its mesh materials array and send the material in world. And then the texture sampler will set the resources for the texture once we're done. So if we had, say, 5 meshes, 3 color light, 2 texture, this will handle meshes 1 through 3, and this will handle meshes 4 and 5. And that's it.